There is some bittersweet news coming out of Ukraine right now. Our boys in blue and yellow are making some good progress and achieving some great striving goals in their war against Russia to defend their country. But Russia has also made some quite decisive moves that have led to a lot of loss of life as of the last couple days on the Ukrainian side. For those who don't know, a few days ago, Ukraine launched a big operation where a series of relatively cheap drones were flown into deeply controlled Russian territory within Ukraine, and they were used to take out fleets of bomber planes. We've got tons of video of like the planes burning and whatnot, and this was a massive deal for Ukraine when they pulled this off. Like, it was really far into the front line of Russia that they managed to land these attacks, and they were at unguarded areas where Russia had assumed, like, how is Ukraine going to attack here? We own this area. Like, the front lines aren't for miles and miles and miles and miles to the west. Like, we don't need to guard these parked bomber planes. Sure enough, they probably should have, because now those bomber planes are destroyed. It was a massive success on the part of Ukraine, and even if they lost every single drone, what it cost Ukraine if they lose every drone in that mission is like $50,000. I want a ballpark, because each drone was said to be like a $4,000 drone. So let's say $50,000 around there, $50 to $60,000. They lost every drone. Russia lost hundreds of millions of dollars worth of high-tier war equipment. It was a big W for Ukraine. I am big toast to our boys in blue and yellow for that victory. However, the news is turning sour, a little more bitter, as Russia has launched a massive missile strike on Ukraine in response. And of course, the majority of the targets have been civilian infrastructure, civilian populations. Putin and Netanyahu seem to learn a lot from each other in that way. So I thought that we would go ahead and take a look at the plight that our Ukrainian friends are dealing with right now, and hope to God that things are able to turn around a little more in their favor soon. They've been making great victories. The Ukrainians fight like hell, and they keep on surprising me with how much they can, like, you know, sort of send out these really devastating blows at Russia, despite how much they've already, like, been pushed back, how much has been taken from them. Yet they're still able to hit Russia so hard. It's genuinely so impressive. Now, to be clear, I don't think Ukraine is falling to Russia. Maybe by the end of this, Ukraine will permanently lose, or at least for now, will lose a decent amount of land to Russia, but I do not think Kyiv or Ukraine as a whole will fall to Russia. I don't think the EU will allow it. I don't think specifically the countries bordering to the west of Ukraine will allow it. It's just, I think Ukraine will be okay in the end, but my hope is they are able to repel Russia's invasion before it gets so nasty that the UN has to get involved, you know?
Bracing for retaliation, for days, Ukraine was pummeled in an overnight Russian attack. Kyiv reports Moscow launched one of its largest drone and missile strikes, killing at least 4 people and injuring nearly 2 dozen in the Ukrainian capital. President Volodymyr.
Once again, by the way, guys, I've stated this story many times, but to get an idea of how devious and evil Russia is about this invasion, I highly recommend you go check out. There's no channel I can recommend more than actually these 2 channels, okay? If you want to get really good on-the-ground journalistic news about the war in Ukraine, Dylan Burns is the best person to go to. This is a man who has been airstriked by Russia no less than twice. No less than twice. When I say airstrike by Russia, I don't mean like, oh, Russia's bombing again, gotta get down. He's done that like 50 times on stream when he's streaming in Ukraine. That's been necessary. The air sirens go off. He's got to get under the table. I don't consider that Russia bombing him. I mean Russia literally bombing his location a guy next to him getting hit by the shrapnel and having to get medevaced, and him being lucky to be alive. And then immediately after, Russia goes to their state media sources and they start pushing the story that Dylan and the people he was with were Ukrainian operatives, armed operatives, when they were in fact journalists and volunteers that were like unarmed and were just helping to like save pets and help evacuate people from the war zone. Russia did this to Dylan twice, and one of those times nearly killed a person that was 2 feet away from Dylan when the bomb hit, and they literally went to lie to their people about how it was justified the next day in their media cycle. That is how devious and nefarious Russia is, and so knowing what Dylan has put himself through to cover this war, I cannot recommend his content enough if you're looking for more stuff on like Ukraine news. And then if you're looking to see footage, specifically really good footage of what's happening in Ukraine, like combat footage, there is a channel that is run by a Marine, I believe, who volunteered to fight in Ukraine alongside the Ukrainians against Russia. And all of his buddies were also ex-US military that also volunteered to fight Russia in Ukraine. And they all recorded it, like hours and hours of combat footage on their GoPros mounted on their helmets, and then sent it to this YouTuber, Civdiv, C-I-V space D-I-V. And he basically uploads videos that are like, here's me and my buddies taking out 3 Russian BMPs with javelin missiles. And then you watch the video, and it's he and his buddies taking out 3 Russian BMPs with javelins. Another one is fragging a team of Spetsnaz. And you watch the video, and it gives you like a big warning, like, hey, people die in this video, watch at your own risk. You click, okay, I'll watch, and it's literally like him and a friend, along with a team of Ukrainian soldiers, like throwing grenades into a building and frag grenading a team of Russian Spetsnaz. If that's the kind of shit you want to see, Civdiv. Those are the 2 channels I cannot recommend enough if you want to like stay up to date on what's happening in Ukraine. And those channels also frequently will give you a link to access methods through which you can support the Ukrainian war effort should you choose to do so, which I highly recommend you choose to do so.
Zelensky said that Russia used more than 400 drones and 40 missiles in the barrage, adding, quote, almost all of Ukraine was in the crosshairs. Meantime, Russian officials say that a Ukrainian drone attack hit an industrial site in the country's south. Our Fred Bleitgen is in Berlin for us with the very latest. So, listen, we all knew that Russia was going to retaliate sooner or later. Did we expect the retaliation to come this quickly and in this form?
Well, we don't know whether the retaliation or the strikes that we saw overnight, whether that was the real retaliation for those massive strikes that we saw from the Ukrainians on those Russian airfields. The Russians simply said earlier today that these were strikes in response to what they call terrorist activities. But one of the things that we've actually seen in the
we are invading your country, but if you fight back against us, you are committing terrorist activity.
Messaging of the Kremlin over the past couple of days is they've been speaking a lot about strikes on the Russian railway system that they blame on the Ukrainians, for which the Ukrainians have actually not yet claimed responsibility, but they've been talking very little about those strikes on those air.
Don't worry, guys. Netanyahu told me exactly how to handle media situation like this.
Fields that, of course, the Ukrainians say did so much damage. Nevertheless, these strikes were massive that happened overnight. You mentioned some of the numbers there, Zane. More than 400 drones, and it really seems as though the Russians have ramped up their own production of those strike drones that they send over into Ukrainian territory. And then also, if we look at the missiles that were used, there were ballistic missiles, which are very difficult to intercept, and really only the best surface-to-air missile systems, like, for instance, the U.S.-made Patriot, can intercept those, and cruise missiles that were used as well. So really a full barrage that was fired by the Russians, but unclear whether or not
it's terrorism because Putin is terrified. That's a good one, KGB. You cooked with that one.
This was it, or whether there is more to come. Of course, we know from that phone call that happened a couple of days ago between U.S. President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin that Vladimir Putin apparently told Donald Trump in that phone call that he would strike back after those attacks on those airfields. But again, from the Russian messaging, it's unclear whether or not this was it or whether there is more to come. And, you know, with all of that being said, this certainly seems as though they were massive strikes, which, as you said, at times the entire country, or almost the entire country, was under a missile air raid alert, and even the Ukrainian Olympic team was affected by all this in the town of Lutsk, a hotel that some of the athletes were staying in, were hit by a blast. There was one athlete who actually managed to record some of what was going on there. So
holy shit.
Devastating strikes that happened overnight.
You can see the volley coming
killed,
in.
But right at this point in time, unclear whether there is more to come.
Here comes another one.
Russians.
Yep.
See, Fred Peck
Good
on Life
God.
was there. Thank you.
They're just like, their goal is just to like devastate as much infrastructure as possible. It's literally just the Israel method. It's literally just devastate as much infrastructure as you can with as much, just like turn the country into a field of craters and then take over. You know, like it is just so bizarre, the era of war that we're in, where we're just watching as countries flatten out other countries. Like, the goal is to wipe out as many people as possible in order to, like, force the other country into submission, or to weaken enough that you can just fully occupy it. Like, and we're watching it happen, you know? Like, we're watching it like no war has been able to be watched before. That's what makes it so especially disturbing, you know?
So much.
That is a scary fucking noise, dude. That is so horrific, man.
New video coming into CNN. You can hear what Ukrainians have experienced over the last few hours. Russia's launching a wave of drones and ballistic missiles across Ukraine, killing at least 4 people and wounding dozens more. Joining us now is Leon Panetta. He served as Defense Secretary and CIA Director under President Obama. Mr. Secretary, thanks so much for joining us. Do you see these latest Russian strikes showing that Vladimir Putin is making good on his threat to retaliate big time after Ukraine's rather humiliating attacks on Russian airfields in recent days? How far do you think all of this will go? How far will Putin go?
I think the clear message is that Putin is going to continue.
Do you hear the air raid siren, bro?
This war. Without pressure from the United States, without pressure from President Trump, he feels that he is in control of the situation, and he's going to continue to hammer Ukraine, largely because President Trump will not put pressure on Putin.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, he thinks he has a license to continue to do this and not participate in any kind of ceasefire. It is a very tragic situation right now in Ukraine.
It's a horrible situation indeed. President Trump, as you know, Mr. Secretary, spoke to Vladimir Putin on Wednesday. I want to play for you and for our viewers and get your reaction to something that Trump said that he told the Russian leader. Listen to this.
Sometimes you see 2 young children fighting like crazy. They hate each other and they're fighting in a park.
Dude, just fuck Donald Trump, man. Oh my God. The like weird, now it's like this weird both sidesing thing where it's like, no, from the start, Russia mobilized onto Ukraine's borders and started invading them. Defending your country from an all-out, full-scale invasion is not being a child and fighting childishly. It's this, like, if you ever wonder, like, what political party is responsible for the zero-tolerance, like, policies in schools, where, like, if someone starts a fight with you and you finish said fight, you get in trouble as well, or even exclusively. Like, this is the same standard by which Trump is assessing Ukraine and Russia. You know, Ukraine is the kid who, like, punched back, and now it's like, you are being so childish defending yourself. Like, what?
And you try and pull them apart. They don't want to be pulled. Sometimes you're better off letting them fight for a while and then pulling them apart. And I gave that analogy to Putin yesterday. I said, President, maybe you're going to have to keep fighting and suffering a lot because both sides are suffering before you pull them apart, before they're able to be pulled apart.
The President of the United States comparing the two sides, Ukraine and Russia, to fighting children. What do you make of that analogy?
I think what it tells me is that there's a total abdication of leadership by the United States in dealing with Ukraine. For the president to now turn his back on that situation and say that somehow they've just got to continue to fight until they're exhausted is not leadership. It is not leadership. The president ought to be putting pressure on Putin by saying very clearly, if you will not agree to a ceasefire, then we will do everything in our power to help Ukraine defend themselves and ultimately defeat you. That's the message that Putin has to hear. And he's not hearing that. What he's hearing.
This is true. Like America, as much as like a lot of people on the left have always been like, America, world police, cringe, like stop trying to be the world's most powerful country. No, America is the world's most powerful country. We've got a big old swinging dick to throw around and make people like do what we want them to do, okay? We can threaten full military support for Ukraine. That will be enough to devastate Russia's military and economy if they don't let up and stop attacking Ukraine. We could always threaten that. We could even start to follow through on it to make Putin think we're serious. Anything could be done here better than this to solve this problem. I think Trump just wants to wash his hands of the situation and do nothing about Russia invading Ukraine. I don't think he wants to fuck up his relationship with Putin.
Hearing there's a weak president basically turning his back on the situation and giving Putin a license to continue these horrible attacks.
One Ukrainian lawmaker actually told CNN that President Trump essentially gave Putin the green light to attack. Do you agree?
I don't think there's any question. The president just basically, after this conversation, has said, let him go ahead and keep fighting. He basically gave a pass to Russia. It is incredible to me. Every president we've had in the last 80 years has stood up to tyrants and has made very clear that they cannot have their way. This is the first president in my memory who basically, instead of standing up to a tyrant like Putin, is essentially allowing him to have his way and not putting any kind of pressure on him to do what is right, which is to achieve a ceasefire. This is historically, I think, will be viewed as the United States totally failing in leadership to be able to stand up to a tyrant who brutally invaded a sovereign democracy. That's the message
that we're allied
history
with.
Will write.
Joining us now to discuss this and more is Ian Bremmer, president of the Eurasia Group. Ian, thanks so much for joining us. As you know, President Putin promised a retaliatory strike for Ukraine's rather daring and successful drone attacks deep inside Russia. Do you think the overnight assault was that retaliation, or could another major strike still be coming?
I mean, if it is, it's not much of a retaliation. With of course, not to minimize the civilian deaths that we're seeing in Kiev, but the Russians have been targeting civilians, unlike the Ukrainians, all the way through this war. And Ukraine.
Everything he's saying here is true. As tragic as the deaths on Ukraine's side are, let's be completely clear. This is not that much of a win for Russia. Russia's just ramping up and doing more of what they've been doing. Meanwhile, Ukraine is hitting Russia where it hurts. They're fighting hard, and they are throwing devastating blows at Russia. Russia's just kind of like trying to death by 1,000 cuts Ukraine, while Ukraine is just like mollywhopping Russia. When Ukraine makes a hit, like hits Russia, it hits hard. That's been the consistent theme here. Like Russia just repeatedly trying operation after operation that just kind of, like doesn't really do anything all that like game changing. It's just kind of slow and steady. But Ukraine just keeps having these massive victories that frankly seem impossible for them to have even gotten, considering the odds.
very little compared to $300 drones taking out $100 million strategic bombers of Russia. And even in Putin's controlled information environment, that's not going to look like much of a retaliation. So no, I don't think we've seen the full extent of what we're going to expect from Putin at this point.
Yeah, I suspect you're right. President Trump
It's going to get worse
Putin
before it gets
spoke on the
better.
phone on Wednesday. President Trump said the Russian leader told him Moscow would have to respond to Ukraine's drone attack. A Ukrainian parliamentarian is accusing Trump of giving Putin an actual green light to do so. Do you think that's how Putin actually sees it?
I guess he sees it as a flashing yellow. I mean, President Biden tried the stick against Putin to try to get him to back away from this illegal invasion, and Biden failed. Trump has now tried the carrot with Putin to sweeten the offer, engage diplomatically, say that he'll get rid of sanctions, willingness to engage on national security and economic investment. And Putin has said no. So they both failed. And I think the more important meeting this week, Wolf, was yesterday in the Oval Office with Chancellor Merz from Germany. And here, what we see is that the U.S. and NATO are much more aligned on Ukraine today than they were a month ago when Zelensky was getting beaten up by Trump in the Oval Office and the U.S. was suspended.
This is true. Trump is a little less cringe on Russia and Ukraine now than he was like a month ago. Like, remember, a month and a half ago, we were talking about that, like Vance and Trump demanding that Zelensky thank Donald Trump and apologize to him and be like suck his dick basically on television. And Zelensky was like, no, I'm not going to do this. Like, we all remember how bad it was a couple months ago. Like, Trump commenting in passing that Putin's lost his mind is frankly a massive improvement from the complete cucked to Putin positions he was taking and expressing just a month and a half ago.
Spending intelligence and military support. We're very far from that. Trump is now thinking about washing his
They're just
hands
targeting
from
like
diplomacy,
condos and apartments.
But he has a critical minerals deal with Ukraine, and you're going to see continued U.S. intelligence support and weapon sales to support the Ukrainians on the ground. So in that regard, the war is ongoing, and there's going to be a lot of pain and human suffering and a lot of cost. But the Americans aren't walking away from NATO, aren't walking away from Ukraine. I think that's quite important.
That is good news, though. Like, I don't think that the EU and it's like NATO is going to allow Ukraine to fall. I don't think that's how it's going to end up going. Apparently, Ukraine has also been like gaining a lot, like a lot over Russia when it comes to their air control. There was this article that
Ukraine on edge. President Volodymyr Zelensky.
There was a story I wanted to watch as well and talk about in regards to Ukraine's air control. It's been a big part of how they've been able to like hold their ground is the way like they've used sky-based weaponry, drones and what have you, to do devastating damage to Russia.
Ukraine on edge. President Volodymyr Zelensky sounding the alarm, warning that Putin's attack on Ukraine is not over, bracing for what will come next. It comes after Russia's massive and widespread strikes overnight. We have some dramatic new footage. You can see that there. More than 400 drones, 40 missiles fired across 9 regions. And these are the scenes from Kyiv where explosions lit up the sky. This is one of the largest attacks of the war so far. The strikes, it seems, a part of the response to Ukraine taking out so many of Russia's strategic bombers. They say
These
41 of Putin's bombers destroyed, all carried out by drones. A weapon that Ukraine, of course, has used to completely redefine warfare itself. Katie Polglaze is out front with a CNN investigation into exactly how they're doing it right now.
Word, okay.
This attack, more than 18 months in the making, is a sign of how Ukraine has changed the face of modern warfare, damaging air bases deep within Russian territory. A CNN analysis of thousands of drone strikes on Russia over the past 3 years, along with video and an exclusive interview.
Damn, they've gotten deep.
Coordinate our drones in Moscow, etc.
Sheds light on how Ukraine's drone program has rapidly expanded since the start of the war. In the first months, you can see the attacks are mainly along the border area, But by the end of the year, they start hitting key military targets, like this blast shown on surveillance footage at a fuel depot at Engels Air Base in December
That was a
2022.
big deal.
5 months later, and the missions become more ambitious. This bold drone attack in May 2023 even damaged the roof of the Kremlin, the heart of the Russian government, and over 400 miles from Kyiv.
That went hard.
Drones are now frequently flying over Moscow, bringing the terror of war home to the Russian people. At the
That's
same
sad.
time, Ukraine is maintaining pressure on Russia's war supplies wherever.
Listen, Russians, all you have to do is put your president's head on a spike or hang him from a street post or something, and all this stops, okay? All this stops. You guys could take care of the problem. You guys in Russia could take care of the problem, just saying.
They are stored. In late summer of 2023, they target Pskov Air Base in northern Russia, beyond Moscow. In satellite imagery taken shortly after, you can see the damaged planes. By 2024, the number of drones getting sent into Russia is soaring.
God
In
damn.
June alone, over
Look at that.
1,000
I have a feeling this entire blotch here is where most of that combat footage, the drone combat footage I've seen on Reddit and whatnot, was recorded from.
launched, according to CNN analysis. Ukraine's muscle comes from a coordinated national effort to make combat drones ready to be sent into Russia. We spoke exclusively to one of these manufacturers who told us how the war kick-started Ukraine's national drone unit.
Now I think Ukraine is leader in this area in our world.
Which drones were used last weekend is still a tight-lipped secret. But experts say his drones are identical to those seen in images of the attack and were most likely the ones used.
We can produce very good drones for special mission, and we will
Hell yeah.
protect our country from Russian aggression.
He shares some extraordinary insights into how it was possible for Ukraine to target so deep into
Look
Russia,
at those babies
hitting an
burn.
airbase 2,500 miles away. Is it possible
Burn,
to
burn,
remote
burn, Russian
control
bombers.
that drone from Ukraine while the drone was in Belaya Air Base, for example?
No problem. We can coordinate our drones in Moscow, etc. We need to link across satellite, across mobile towers, or maybe our pilot will stay near Kremlin.
And the success of the program is apparent by the damage left behind. Multiple air bases hit, some in Russia's far east. Ukraine claims it inflicted $7 billion worth of damage on Russian weaponry, though that number has not been verified. Even so, the details of this
right.
stealthy operation are extraordinary.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the drones suspected to have been used for this attack are like $4,000 each, right? So we're talking magnitudes less money being spent by Ukraine than what is taken from Russia when they conduct an operation like this.
Drones smuggled in on wooden crates, then driven across Russia in containers, catching locals by surprise as drones flew out of trucks to launch the assaults.
That shit is so cool. I'm
Russia
not gonna
now
lie.
faces an even steeper challenge to its long-held dominance of the skies. Katie Poglaze, CNN, London.
All right, and joining me now is Seth Jones, national security expert and president of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So, Seth, you have just returned from reviewing frontline drone footage. You've done that with top military leadership from Ukraine. So you've seen things that none of us have actually seen. What stands out to you from that, from what you saw, from what you heard about what really happened on those air bases?
Well, Aaron, what is really stunning is how the Ukrainians used the Russian logistics system, including their mobile network, to smuggle drones into Russia itself, and then to use the mobile system and the satellite system from Russian territory as they conducted strikes. So, I mean, it's not just getting
Trojan horsed Russia.
those platforms into Russian territory, but it's also taking advantage of what was available in Russia to strike targets. I mean, it really shows.
Petition to now call the Trojan horse the Ukrainian crate.
how vulnerable countries can be if those kinds of drones are smuggled inside of those countries, obviously more than just Russia.
Right. Well, and that, in that sense, a very sobering thing you just said there. So when you're with that top military leadership, though, and we had those big attacks overnight, some of the biggest since the war began in Kyiv. Is that it? I mean, what do they think Putin is going to do? I mean, Trump made it very clear that Putin was going to do something big, and that ceasefire's off, and which it was never really on, but you get the point. What does Ukraine think is going to happen?
Well, Aaron, I think there are a few things. One is the Ukrainian leadership, and I talked to the head of the Office of the President while he was in Washington this week. They do expect the Russians to conduct a range of cruise missile, ballistic missile, and drone strikes against cities, including Kyiv, in large numbers. That's the way the Russians respond. I don't think they expect to see any kind of a nuclear response, although Putin routinely threatens those. But I think at the end of the day, the problem that the Russians have is they are not effectively conducting military operations. They're dying in really historic numbers, at least since World War II. And so I think that's the Ukrainian response, is to keep fighting them on the ground. And that's where the Russians really are at their biggest weakness.
Okay, so on that, we haven't heard that sort of an argument in a while. In fact, what we've heard is that in a war of attrition, Russia will win because they have more men. And it's just that simple. And that it boils down to numbers, and the numbers are horrible, but they don't favor.
In a war of attrition, the defender tends to have the advantage.
For Ukraine. So the longer this continues, the more it favors Russia, right? That has become the narrative, right, out there. But you've got new reporting, and you're talking about struggles on the front line for Putin's forces to advance. You've got numbers on the equipment, that they've lost a lot more equipment than Ukraine, that the casualty numbers now approach 1 million for Russia. In fact, you gave us a chart that shows the daily average of casualties since the war began.
Holy
and it
shit.
all challenges the narrative that Putin can just continue and afford to go on indefinitely. When you went through and looked at all these numbers right now, which do challenge the current
over
narrative,
1,000 people per day.
What surprised you the most?
That's
Aaron, there
crazy.
were two things that surprised me, and one of them was one of the numbers that the president himself remarked out of our report in the Oval Office yesterday. One was just the sheer casualties that the Russians have suffered. Nearly 1 million. They'll hit the 1 million mark by June or July. And also in a historical perspective, the Russians have lost now more than 5 times the number of soldiers than in all Russian wars combined between the end of World War II and the beginning of their full-scale invasion in February.
How does Russia spin that in their media? How do you spin that as like this being a war that should be continued? Like this war has got to be getting unpopular there, right?
2022. I mean, 77-year period versus a 3-year period, a little over 3-year period, still 5 times the number that they've lost over the last 3 years. I mean, it's just stunning in its significance. And also, the other thing that was interesting in what we found was how little territory and how slow the advance of the Russians has been, slower than some of the most grinding and grisly offensive during World War I.
Wow. And when we hear about those, and just the sheer death and suffering in that war, trench warfare, where, of course, it's trench warfare here again. Seth, thank you so much.
Thanks, Aaron.
Ukraine on edge.
Man, this whole situation, it's bittersweet because, yes, Ukraine pulled out a massive W, but more Ukrainian civilians are now being put under Russia's boot. More of them are being killed. And, it's just sad to see that we're now years into this war, and it doesn't seem like an end is in sight. I'm going to be honest. It does not seem like an end is in sight. Not unless the UN wants to get involved and they want to send in like US or just NATO troops on the ground, engaging in combat against Russia. Like, that's the best case scenario I can see at this point for this ending well. Some Zetards are coping by saying the Russians allowed the drones to destroy the bombers and it won't make a difference. There have been a lot of Russian sympathizers that have been trying to twist every Ukrainian victory into not being a big deal. And that tells me that at least on the Russian side, they are shaken by these victories that Ukraine is achieving. It's not just drops in a bucket. Like, they are trying to get some kind of win out of these situations, because these victories on Ukraine's part are hitting Russia hard, and that's a bit of a silver lining to the situation. That said, though, if you enjoyed this video, or if you're watching this live, please consider hitting the like button. Every single thumbs up goes a long way to force YouTube to boost my channel in the algorithm and recommend my stuff to more people. It really helps the channel grow, so thank you to everybody who hits that thumbs up button. It's totally free, takes half a second, and it means the world to me. Don't forget to comment as well if you want to double up on the support for the channel. If you don't know what to say, you can just comment, "Who up Xandering they haul?" And if you see someone comment it, you can just reply to them, "OMG me." It really does help the channel a lot, and it's totally free. Of course, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell icon to turn on all notifications so YouTube actually tells you when I go live or upload new videos in the future. Follow my social medias linked down below so you don't miss any of my future engagements with the internet. And of course, don't forget to join my Discord server. That's the main hub of my community and fan base. I host weekly gaming events, call-in streams, watch parties, and movie nights there, such as tonight, every Friday. Tonight we'll be watching Baki, and I will be working out while we do our watch party. I welcome you guys to work out with me. I highly hope to see many of you guys get into good physical shape with me as your motivator. But I highly recommend you join regardless of whether or not you plan to work out. It's going to be a great time. We'll be watching Baki and just, hanging out, chilling, vibing. Hopefully I'll see you guys there. But of course, don't forget, if you want to go the extra mile and support me directly, financially, help me keep the lights on and a roof above my head here at the Xander Hall studio, then please consider donating, subscribing, or gifting a sub to someone else on my website, xanderhall.com/live, or support me through YouTube, Twitch, Streamlabs, Stream Elements, Patreon, or buy some custom Xander Hall merch to the Streamlabs link down below. Regardless of how you support me, though, thank you so much for watching, as always, and have a good one.